Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Frank Finnemore. I'm the Executive Director of the Cleveland and Woodley Park Village, and I want to welcome you to this training today that we have on addressing holiday grief. I want to first thank All Souls Episcopal Church in Woodley Park for a generous grant that makes this training possible today. And also want to thank the other three villages in Ward 3, that's Northwest Neighbors, Palisades Village, and Glover Park Village for partnering with us today to offer this training. We have with us today Janet Carter, who is the Associate Director of Corwood Care Management, and she'll tell you a little bit about Corwood. I think it's an important mission that they have, a two-part mission. And I'll just say that Janet is certainly a licensed clinical social worker, and she has many years of experience, decades of experience, as well as personal experience helping older adults with healthy aging. So I'm delighted that they partnered with us today. I really appreciate Janet for taking this assignment on for us, and I'll turn it over to her. And as I do, I just want to let everyone know that you are muted. So if you would like to say something, all you need to do is sort of let us know by raising your hand, or if you want to use the Zoom functions, you can just go to the reactions and say, click on reaction and then put raise hand. So again, we are recording this so that we can make this available to people that are not able to join us today. We know that there are some, and we want to make this available to anyone that needs it, working with older adults in the community. So with that, I'll turn it over to Janet.
Thank you for that. And I want to say how grateful I am to be invited to come and do this training. The fact that you guys are interested in learning about this topic and really focusing in on how does the holidays impact folks who are aging and who probably have loss in their lives. It is a topic that oftentimes people shy away from, so I applaud you guys for moving towards it. Just a little bit about myself. As Frank had mentioned, I am approaching 15 years since my graduation from social work school. And in that time, I have worked primarily in fields of health, in particular around chronic diseases. But for the last 8 years, I focused on working with older adults. And my current job here at Corwood Care Management has really been able to allow me to look at and use all of my skills to see what a person needs in all aspects of life. So care management, if you guys are not aware, is a wonderful profession where somebody who has a higher educational and or professional experience in different areas of aging chooses to come and work with individuals who have needs and have the desire to have the highest quality of life as they age. So often in today's world, we like to put ourselves into different boxes. So somebody who has a medical issue, somebody who's struggling with depression, somebody who is perhaps has mobility issues. And in reality, as we get older, sometimes those things all happen at once. And so having one person be your guide, to be your coach, or to even help you along is what we do. Corwood Care also has a wonderful additional side of home care. So when we can work together, it's a lovely integration of support for older adults. So that's a little bit about me and what I do. But I have to say, I was telling Frank that one of my joys in life is facilitating workshops. And I haven't been able to do that since COVID hit. So you guys are in for my enthusiasm. So I apologize ahead of time. I really think this is such an important interactive topic that I would really encourage all of you to participate as much as you're able or feel comfortable with. Since we are a Zoom group, I do ask that you guys use either the reaction, raise hand, or physically raise your hand to contribute so we don't miss anyone. And also so that we are able to talk one at a time. So let's dig in. I'm going to share my screen I practiced this earlier, so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay. So what is this idea of words of comfort? Oftentimes when the holidays come, there is this idea of a time of added stress or anxiety. So one aspect of what I thought would be important for us to kind of figure out today is, why is this something we need to talk about? Why are the holidays challenging for people, especially people experiencing loss? I put a few things in here, but I was wondering if anyone wanted to add anything. One of the biggest components is it's a time of family and rituals. And when you're no longer able to continue those traditions or rituals, there can be a great sense of loss that can cause folks to feel their sense of bereavement in a different way. One thing I learned that was a very deep lesson was that it's not that there is more grief during the holidays. It is just that it is pointed out during the holidays. So does anyone else have any things you want to add about why holidays are challenging and why this is something that drew you to this topic? Don't worry, there'll be plenty more times to contribute throughout this talk. So let's reflect on challenging times that you have experienced. I think one of the components about this is to have some self-reflection as we dig into this topic. So one aspect that it is an absolute is that grief is very individual. A loss is something that you feel differently than other people, that you can articulate differently than other people, that there is no right or wrong way to experience grief. And that oftentimes that's a big challenge, because then people don't necessarily know how to meet you in your grief. So one component about this that has been researched to demonstrate is that there are specific stages of grief. Do any of you know about those stages of grief, or what does that mean for you?
Just a reminder to folks that you can either just unmute and speak up, or you can just raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
Great. Thank you for being the brave one. I think you're unmuted.
You're speaking to Carolyn.
Hello.
Hi. Well, excuse my voice. I have a little laryngitis condition, I think. But about this grief, what struck me is that the holidays are so attached to memories that you have. For example, you might start remembering all the things your mother did for you on certain holidays. And of course, as a senior citizen, our mothers usually aren't with us anymore. So I think that is something that tends to make one kind of sad, are just these memories of happier times or more inclusive times of family members or friends. And as seniors, excuse me, also some of our friends start to pass on that we had shared times with, going down to see the national Christmas tree with them, or, things like that. And then all of a sudden they can't do it. And so we're kind of left wondering what to do.
Yes. I really hear that deeply, because a lot of time grief is around change. And when we're not looking for change, when it's forced upon us, and we have these memories of happier times, and when memories get older, the happier they become. That's one thing I've learned. Then, not being able to do those things feels like a loss. Absolutely. Does anyone else like to share anything about this idea of grief being individual? Now, what I'd like you to do is take a moment and think back to a time where you experienced loss. This does not need to be something that was a death of a loved one. It could simply be the loss of a job, the death of a pet. But when people were trying to comfort you, what did you want to hear from them? And what were the phrases that did help you? I know for me personally, one of the components that was the most difficult was, how are you doing? I just felt like that phrase was just so unanswerable at the time that to be asked that over and over again felt like almost that I had to present a happy face, even if I wasn't feeling that way. I don't know if others have had that experience. Okay. One other component about this, which goes exactly to the 2 points above, is that when it comes to communicating and offering comfort to folks dealing with loss, is that we throw out the golden rule. Can anyone tell me what the golden rule is?
Is that do unto others as you would have them do unto you?
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. So why am I saying throw that out? Does anyone have a thought about why? Seems like it would be a good thing. Yes, Adrian.
Well, I think about, for example, my sister who when she experiences loss wants everybody to just like hug her and love her and be all around her. And for me, I know this, I don't mean to sound cold, but I find that suffocating. So I have a much harder time, I guess, accepting, sort of love and hugs and kisses than my sister does. And so it ties back to it being so very individual.
So incredibly true. What a very insightful response. And yes, it goes even to this aspect of like, what do we need? Not just what do we want to hear, but what do we need? And for some folks, it is very much about a physical comfort, a physical presence. And for others, that's overwhelming. That's too much. That feels like it is almost to the point of overstimulation in a way. So although we know it's a great thing to know what you need. And in fact, I suggest all of us take a moment to think about what we need, because then we can articulate it to others. But when we're approaching somebody else, to make sure that we put what we need to the side and think about what we know about them and what can we ask. The biggest component about this topic is going to be the fact that it requires vulnerability on our part. Does anyone have like a fear when it comes to talking about grief with somebody else, especially someone that perhaps isn't a close family or friend? Yes, Erin. Oh, 1 second, Erin, sorry. Gonna get you unmuted.
I'm trying.
There it is.
Oh, it's good. Sorry about that. So sorry, I'm already tearing up. So my brother passed, and it's very difficult for me to share this with the strangers. I don't know why I'm actually weeping. Apologies.
Yeah, it's tough.
But when I go home, I'm this very strong, like pinnacle, where all my parents and my family members can just kind of lean on me. So that like vulnerability portion is starting to spill out a little bit. I think COVID had a big part of that. And I've been working on trying to share in like a, appropriate way with
Mhm.
and I know that like doesn't seem very appropriate right now because I'm obviously crying. But it's very difficult to just make yourself vulnerable because when you do that, you kind of open up all of those wounds that you have yourself.
Oh, very true, Erin. And it is important to make sure that you guys are also feeling okay in this process. It is both the fact that you need to take care of yourself as well as offering comfort for others. The other side about that sometimes folks can feel is that they might do something wrong, that there's the wrong way of approaching the situation where you might inflict an unintentioned hurt on somebody. And I can appreciate very much how that can happen, as I'm sure we've all experienced it, right? So that's something that, as if we've experienced it, we know how much that can be something that hurts in this process where I'm already pretty darn sad. And I don't want to give that to anyone else. Is that something anyone's feeling? I see some nods, yes. So those are two of the components that I want to keep on talking about as we go through these different aspects of communication when it comes to grief. And I'm going to say one thing that is Janet's golden rule. Doing something is better than nothing. Even if we say the wrong thing, doing something is better than nothing. Okay.
Well, I was just going
Yes.
to say that sometimes I think one worries a bit, if you offer your sympathy or condolences or something like that, that the other person, they're not comfortable with that and they might brush you off. And then you don't know quite what to do after that.
Yes. Yes. The moment of, and now what? I agree. And we're going to talk about that a little bit because it happens very often because folks don't really know what they want to say in a moment, especially if that wasn't the reason why they were talking to you or seeing you in that moment. So let's get into it. If I can get my screen to go to the next, there it is. This is the key to it, which is understanding how they are presenting themselves and how they're reacting to what you say so that you can see that individualization of what you can do to change and react, which is exactly, Carolyn, what you're saying. So what is it about somebody's body language and other nonverbal signs that can help us understand their current state of mind? Understanding the unspoken is one of the keys to good communication in general, but it really truly helps when people are dealing with loss because so often they aren't able to verbalize their feelings. That goes back to my point about when people tell me, how are you doing? I have no idea what to say. Sometimes it's because I don't know how I'm doing. So perhaps if we are able to see or hear components of what they're presenting to us from the very moment, we can adjust and then react. So the important part is to start with your observations from the moment the interaction begins, or if you are doing a friendly visit or dropping things off, it can start from the moment that you get up to their front door. So what would be some things that you would look for or would have some impact that you want to make sure you're looking out for? Any suggestions, ideas, anything you've noticed in the past that have struck you as interesting information? Let me start off with one example. One component to me about somebody's feelings around the holidays is whether or not there is some sort of holiday decoration, either on their front door or inside their house. If there's no decorations, that's something that I just take note of. Could mean simply that they're not a person that likes to decorate, but it could also mean that they're just not looking forward to the holidays, that they're avoiding it, or that it's something that they don't even want to pull out their old memories, as we talked about. So that's one observation. That's a pretty easy one to assess quickly. Is there something else that kind of rings a bell?
And again, folks can just unmute yourself and speak, or you can raise your hand.
No one is forced to speak. I promise I'm not going to go and call people's names, but it is something where you will gain more as we get deeper into these topics. So sometimes you're not in their physical space. Sometimes it is very much about their tone or the context of the words that they're giving you. Tell me something that you have experienced about someone's tone that gave you insight into where they are. And hint, Erin might have given that to us already. Yes,
So-
Lucky?
Oh, me? Okay, sorry. I was just going to say sometimes it's, you know, you say a word that, you know, using the how are you doing? And the person says, I'm fine. You know, it's not, there's no, you know, emphasis, there's no emotion behind it, or somebody might look like they used to keep themselves well kept and now all of a sudden, you know, their hair is kind of messy, or, you know, they're just not taking care of themselves in the same way in terms of just the nonverbal communication.
Two very, very excellent observations. Thank you. And it's true. It's about knowing that person ahead of time that helps with that idea about if they're slightly different. But sometimes, no matter what, you can see if somebody's appearance is not at the level of what we know anyone would use in terms of dress or hygiene or things like that. Yes, Carolyn.
And what I notice is immediately you can often see something in the expression in the face and even the eyes. What did they say? The eyes are the window to the soul. And you can see it in their eyes if they're suffering or not happy, something like that. Yeah.
Yes, there's a really not beautiful technical term that's called affect, and that's exactly what you're talking about, Carolyn. It's what does the face do along with the words. And sometimes a key way to know if something is perhaps not going well is when their facial expression doesn't match the words that they're saying. So if they're laughing at a time when they're talking about loss. But sometimes it's also very much that you are just reading their expressions. And so, Erin, I'm sorry, I did not mean to highlight you, but becoming tearful is very much some of that unspoken component that something is being brought up to the surface, just to be aware.
And I know that I've even done this myself. And in a situation like that, sometimes you almost laugh a little bit, like, and I think it's just you feel so uncomfortable or uneasy or nervous about it.
Yes. Oh, yes. Right. When there is a difference in that affect, it doesn't necessarily mean something is significantly wrong, but it is maybe that this is a topic they're uncomfortable. And that's perhaps a moment for us to step back and not ask further questions. Perhaps you notice that it's not one of those anxious or I don't know what to do kind of laughs, but it is a deep, hearty chuckle about, well, at least I don't need to cook a Thanksgiving dinner. Then, you know, yes, that's true. And maybe there's something else going on. So sometimes we're gonna get into some of the suggestions about what to do in those circumstances, but just even mentioning that's something to think about is important. Does anyone want to add anything before we move on? Yes, Adrienne.
Well, I noticed when my mother was going through a lot that almost any time of day I would come over and she would be wrapped up in a blanket napping. And it almost seemed like it was a way of avoiding. It was a lot, napping and cold and just curled up all the time.
And we feel like we can get away with it a little bit more during the season because it is cold. and it's dark early and we do get tired, but there is a component to that, which I think is very true. How can I avoid my feelings and the world around me? I can sleep. Okay. Now let's get into some of the components about, I like to say, and now what? So now we've thought and talked about kind of what could happen. We can talk about things to look for. And so now, what do we do with it? The first component that is a great place to start are open-ended questions. There's two things here that allows folks to feel safer in their answer. One is open-ended questions allow them to go in any area. They don't feel like there's a right or wrong answer. Many times we like to ask questions where we're leading them to the answer we want to hear, even if we're doing it unconsciously. Again, that goes back to how are you doing? We expect to hear fine, because it's more of a social construct than a true question about how someone's doing. So even though that sounds like it's an open-ended question, it's one that society has decided we already know the answer to. Another version of this is, so what are your plans for the holiday? They might not have plans. That is not an open-ended question. That might be something where now they feel like they have to make up something to show that they're okay in some way. So open-ended questions mean that it's non-judgmental, that there is no expectation that they respond in a specific way, nor will you judge them if they respond in a specific way. Not only are they non-judgmental, but they also use words that don't have emotional connotations to them. This goes back to tone. So I'm gonna also talk about the fact that we can bring in tone and context that they can pick up on. So if we're like, how are you doing? They're gonna feel that you are truly expecting to play a role in whatever the negative feelings that they're experiencing at this moment, even if they don't want to share. If we say, so what are the plans for the holidays? Again, it's that same component of adding our own emotional context to the conversation. Now, it doesn't mean you need to be monotone, but just be aware of how you're presenting it. So
now, can I ask a question? Is there a difference between these two sentences?
Mhm.
How are you? Or how are you? Is there a difference between where you put the emphasis on how are you or how are you?
Yes, Alan, you're absolutely right. There is a difference when you put the emphasis. And when you end with that emphasis on you, that is an emotional context to that word where we assume something is wrong. So how are you allows them to have a little bit more space to answer in any way that they want to. Maybe they say surprisingly.
So the preference is how are you rather than how are you?
Yes. How does it feel when you say it that way?
Okay, now my interpretation, I mean, you're the expert, but when I say how are you, I'm asking the person, how are you in particular? Not you generically, not you generally, but you specifically. I'm really interested in you.
You're absolutely right. And sometimes they're not ready for that intensity. If you know them, if you've seen the other unspoken components that they're in a place where they really need to share, then saying it that way will allow them to open up. If this is the first time you're maybe meeting them, or if you guys don't have a good a strong relationship, if you don't know if they're experiencing loss, it would be better to have the other inflection.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And again, it's never going to be 100% one way or the other. What I'm giving you guys are some skills and ways to think about things so that you can react to the scenarios you're confronted with. But again, it's still better to do something than nothing. That vulnerability allows you to recognize if perhaps we didn't observe the right component. And the next step is a simple apology. So the one component that I'd like to say about these open-ended questions is to listen till the end. I don't know how much of an expert I am on anything, but the one thing I learned over the years is that silence is almost as important as the words that you say. Allowing someone to speak, listening to them, nodding along so that they know they're in a conversation, but not interjecting about your story, not asking them a question in the middle, but really being present and listening to the answer to the question is the best gift you can give someone. Okay, does anyone have an open-ended question they want to try out and see how it feels to say it? Okay. Keep on going, because I have some suggestions at the end of this section so we can review them together. So this is, again, a little bit of a technical term, use of self. And Erin, thank you so much for sharing with us, because this is very much a component of our work when we are talking with folks that are not our family or friends around loss. So why do we share details about ourselves? Does anyone have any ideas about how that would, why that would have value, why that would build connection?
Well, when I was teaching, I taught refugees and immigrants who had come here from other countries and they had lost everything.
Mm.
And so sometimes we would have these talks. And then in other situations, like with members of friends and whatnot, I could bring those experiences in as an example. Like, well, when I was teaching, I had a student who said this or did this. And I think it makes it more real if you can use personal experiences or real people without naming someone.
Yes, this is a buzzword that's used quite a bit today, but to me, it's such a core of the idea of helping someone is to be authentic. Exactly what you're sharing, Carolyn, when you're trying to share and you do that in an authentic way, it can really help someone see that they're not alone. So very, very good comment and observation. Anybody else have another reason why we would share details about ourselves if we feel comfortable?
It seems to me that if you open yourself up to somebody else, that might encourage them to open up themselves to you.
Yes, we're talking about that vulnerability again. Yes, if we are asking somebody to share something that's a challenge for them, even though they might want to, it's a wonderful opening for you to share something about yourself. However, there's a big asterisk next to it, which is, when is it appropriate? Does anyone have any ideas about how you make the decision about when you share something that's a personal story or a detail?
I'll say I tend to do it when, or I try to do it when it's going to reinforce something that is being shared or has been shared, but it's not going to take the spotlight from what the individual has already shared, because I want them to know I'm with them, but I'm not taking over the show.
Such a good way to put it. Correct. Our use of ourselves should be in support of what you're trying to accomplish with your conversation with somebody else. It is not a comparison. Sometimes when we talk with friends where we have an established relationship, we almost becomes like who can tell the best story, or who has the best example of something, or perhaps the worst example of something. We're not looking for comparison, and we're not looking for them to comfort us. Those are two key components about when it's a good time to use yourself. So I would say, Erin, that if it's something that still is very raw to you, that might not be the time to share about what you are experiencing, simply because you should share that in a place where you're going to be helped, where it's going to be for your care. And to know that the people you are talking with might not have the capacity or bandwidth to meet you there. So we're meeting them, they're not meeting us. But we're still human. We still want to bring our authentic being to the conversations. So absolutely, using details and stories about yourself is very appropriate when we kind of keep those guidelines in place.
You know, if I say to somebody, how are you? And they answer, okay. I mean, I don't know where to go after that. So then I would try and introduce something about myself to keep the conversation going. Otherwise, I don't know what else to say. If I ask them how they are and they say, okay, I don't know what else to say.
Absolutely. And that goes back to those open-ended questions. You're trying to get them to say something more than one word. So sometimes saying things about yourself and then asking if they've experienced it is a great way to keep the conversation going. So we're going to take your example. They say, I'm okay. I could respond with, oh, that's wonderful. You know, holidays can be challenging. I know for me, what I miss not living near my family is going to Christmas service on Christmas Eve. Oh, are there any things you used to do with your families?
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to introduce the topic. I did share about myself. It is something I miss very much. And it's also not asking them about sharing something they miss. It's just asking for them to share.
I guess you make a good point. It's not only saying to them what you do, but asking them about what they did compared to what you did or related to what you did. So rather than just talk about yourself, you invite them to comment on what you said about yourself. Yeah, I guess that's
yes. Yes. And it can be also the reverse. So I don't do holiday cards, but I love getting them. So that might be something that I would bring up as a very common experience that we have during this time of year is, you know, saying, I just am not a person that can sit down and write those letters, even though I love to get them. Do you send out letters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Carolyn.
And I also have used this idea of saying, when you're with someone, you might say something like, well, we certainly are going through strange or difficult or whatever times with the holidays and the pandemic.
Yes.
And I've had several experiences where people just, oh my goodness, they just clue in on that, you know, like with Thanksgiving or with the upcoming holidays.
Thank you for saying that, because that is one of the best open-ended questions out there at this particular moment in time, because it's something that we're all experiencing in one way or another. Or even if they're not experiencing it, they want to share that they're not experiencing it because everyone else is having a different experience. So I think it's such a wonderful thing, because not only is it open-ended and there's no judgment associated with it, it's simply just a observation about what's going on in the world around us. But finally, it's also acknowledging the truth of the situation. Sometimes holidays bring about this sense of forced cheer, which means that we don't talk about difficult subjects, which is why some people really shy away from talking about loss or struggles around the holidays, because we don't want to deal with that. It's the holidays. I want to have a good time. So many folks maybe don't feel like they should share because they don't want to ruin the holidays. So giving them this opening of like, everyone's kind of in a strange place right now. And, you know, I'm trying to figure out the new ways to embrace the holidays, you know, and asking about their experiences is such a great way of acknowledging, but keeping it open for them to just offer up what they want to. All right, so I'm gonna go to my next slide, which really talks about some phrases when you know that they're struggling, either because they've said it to you in your open-ended questions, or because it's something that is the reason why they're asking for you to come and see them or talk to them on the phone. A component that you can never, ever mess up is to say something. It's not like, I can't imagine what you are feeling right now. I can't imagine what you're going through. I can't imagine how you're standing upright right now. But I'm here, but I'm willing to listen, but I'm happy to see you. These phrases very much allow them to just be. You know, they might say something like, well, I'm actually doing better than I expected. And then you can celebrate that. It could be that they can say, I don't even know what I'm feeling right now. And you can sit with that. The idea is that we don't have an expectation for them. That I can't imagine goes back to the fact that loss is individual. And also that you know that you're not going to make it about yourself. That you're offering them the opportunity to share what they want to. And then again, if you are at that phase where you're like, I don't really know where to go with this conversation next, if you feel up to it before any question is great. If they're giving you like the one-word answers, even for open-ended, if they're having long pauses in between, you ask them, do they feel up to it? Do you feel up to to talking anymore? Do you feel up to sharing with me a memory of you and your husband? It allows them to have the ability to say yes or no. And then finally, sometimes folks just aren't in a place to talk, but they don't want you to go. And you can sense that, maybe they even articulated it. But that can sometimes feel like a very big challenge. So this phrase is one that you can just, again, acknowledge the reality. I'm happy to sit with you and we don't have to talk.
And where does it go from there? I mean, you don't talk and they don't talk, so what happens?
Silence. Now, it doesn't have to be forever. It can even just be for 30 seconds. But saying that it's okay for them not to fill the space, to not have to use their energy in this conversation is okay. After that time period, maybe it's something where you make a suggestion about something to do as an activity. And I'm going to come to that in another slide. Next, before I go there, would anyone else like to comment about these phrases or very, very general ways of sharing your support?
And Janet, I guess I was wondering if you get to what they need, you could say something like, I can't imagine what you're going through. Do you have any sense of what might be helpful? Finding out a little bit about what their, platinum, I call it the platinum rule, when you try to serve what they need rather than the golden rule, what we want.
Yes.
So can you do that and see if they're up for telling you that they just want some silence, or that they'd really like a hug, or like to talk about something else because it's too painful right now?
Yes, it's an excellent point that you bring up. And this does go back to a lot about the nonverbal components, to know whether or not they're in a space where they are able to articulate it. If they're low energy, if they're not really able to answer any of the questions, they're not going to be able to articulate what they need. But, if they're really in a space where they're engaging with you, where you're hearing stories and you want to do something, you want to support them in some way, that is an excellent time to ask that question. I can't imagine what you're feeling right now, but is there something I can do to help? And then if they say, I don't know, you could always make it an active response, which is, well, can I offer up a few suggestions? And let's them kind of say yes or no to what you're saying, because it absolutely could be that they're so overwhelmed or they don't even know what you could do, that they're not able to think through and bring it to your attention. So sitting there in silence might not be something they've ever thought about before, but it actually sounds really good because, you know, that was something that they used to do, you know, with whomever it is that they are missing at this moment. Or maybe it is doing those holiday cards, but the idea of getting all the envelopes together and sitting there and having to do them by yourself feels overwhelming. My favorite is also to ask if anyone wants to be distracted. No, please only offer this if you truly can be a chatterbox. But if you have the gift of gab and they are willing to be distracted, it can be a wonderful way to have a moment and share together. Do you not want to think about that at all? Would you like to just be distracted and then be able to distract them? So yes, asking them what they need is great. Yes, Carolyn.
And I was just going to say that, you know, we're such a hugging society, but sometimes I think a hug can be almost too much emotion attached to the hug. And sometimes maybe a pat on the side of the arm or the shoulder is just enough physical connection without it being, you know, intrusive or too much.
And it can also be because there's still some need to have social distancing, that there are other ways to offer comfort that isn't a physical touch.
Mm-hmm.
I have to admit, again, I'm a huggy person.
Uh-huh.
So it's been very challenging for me not to hug people. I do ask, but in the world where we're not supposed to hug, I actually hug myself, which I know sounds silly, but it is silly. And then the person laughs and it's a moment together. Again, that's only if that's something that feels authentic to you, but there are lots of ways of handling that instead of just having a one-to-one of, do you want comfort? I will hug you. Okay. Is there anyone who'd like to talk that maybe hasn't had a chance yet? Even if it's not necessarily about this specific slide, I would really love to hear if there's anything on your mind. Well, we still have a few slides to go, so let me know. Okay. This is what I was saying about sometimes there is an action involved with the comforting words. This is where I'm talking about being authentic and feeling what each individual is like and what they enjoy. But, you know, if what they miss are the carols, is it a way that you guys can sing a carol together? If it's lighting a menorah, then, you know, making sure that they have the candles. Or asking them if they know what was something that they wanted to continue to do that they haven't been able to do. Sometimes in today's world, even figuring out how to listen to music can be a challenge. So if they say they like a certain type of music, can you help them make a playlist in today's world and give directions on how to get to that playlist? Watching a holiday movie together. I know many of us have the tradition of watching It's a Wonderful Life every year. If that's something that has meaning, is that something you guys can do? And then again, help them send out holiday cards if that's something that they've wanted to do, but haven't felt like they could have the energy to accomplish it. Or allow them the space to say, I don't want to do it this year. But sometimes they might be feeling guilty. And so if you say, you'll do it next year, that can allow them to feel like they're off the hook for some of these rituals. So the point of this is that even with these activities, it doesn't mean that you're asking them to cheer up or to pull themselves up from their bootstraps or to make them feel good for the holidays because they have to feel good for the holidays. It's not about that. It's about being together with somebody and offering them, and this goes back to you. So if they want to sit in silence now, what? You can do something instead. You don't have to just sit in silence. You can make a suggestion of, well, let's listen to some good old Bing Crosby music, which is one of my favorites. Or do you have any movies that you love to watch? Maybe we can get started with one and I'll watch the first 15 minutes with you, because I know that 2 hours is a lot, but making that suggestion of an activity and starting it together actually means that they'll do it. So it's a thought. And maybe it'll give them some ideas about new ways to celebrate or new traditions that they can start. Maybe even they've always wanted to FaceTime, but it's more challenging for them at this particular moment with their family because they live far away. Is there something you can do to help facilitate that? These are all very individualized, but not something to think about. We have one more section, but before I go there, does anyone want to say anything? Ask questions, make a different suggestion, tell something that they've currently experienced or experienced in the past that you'd like support on? Now is the time.
I'll just share one insight that I had. I was sitting with my mother. She was in her late 80s. It was before dementia really started for her. And she was trying to do her holiday cards. And she was really sad. Mm-hmm. And she lived with me. So I had lots of time to sort of be with her and try to support her and things. But really, the reason why she was sad was because she kept seeing in her address book, all the people that had died. Mm-hmm. And one of the best gifts I think I ever gave her was rewriting her address book, which, in one part I hated to do because I didn't want her to forget those people, but I could see that it brought pain. And we talked about it, and she really enjoyed it. It would have never dawned on me that would be helpful, or that was a stumbling block. But so I just raised that here, that can sometimes be difficult.
Yes, because this loss is so individual, it's really hard to know all of the different pitfalls to avoid or the questions to ask. So this really is a lot of observing and listening. Because something like that, you're absolutely right, Frank. It's such a wonderful observation, and one that I don't know if we would have thought of if we weren't able to ask those questions, if you weren't able to ask those questions. And what a gift to give. I know one thing I did was I actually would add all of their grandchildren's addresses in that perhaps they hadn't updated in a while, or other folks that are friends, so that they would see new people as well, new names. So the sky's the limit here. We're going to go back to my number one rule, which is better to do something than nothing. My rule number two is vulnerable and authentic. And rule number three is you can always change tactics. And that goes back to if their reaction isn't one that shows that you're going in the right direction, try something else. It's okay to not be perfect. Folks would much rather have you try than not to try, as long as you come at it from this component of non-judgmental, of listening, of being able to share in a way that helps them. They will understand if your phrasing isn't exactly right, because it's never going to be exactly right, because everyone is different. I have definitely said things that have hurt people unintentionally. And what happens every time is when I apologize, when I acknowledge it, when I say, you know, I'm sorry, I just, sometimes there's just isn't the right thing to say, but I know I definitely said something wrong, can really help in continuing the conversation and let them feel like they're in control.
Yeah, they're in control, and also that you do care about their feelings. And you
Yes.
know, if you apologize, they might say something like, well, it's okay, and then continue with a different aspect of the conversation.
It's so true. It's such a part of our human nature that, you know, if we have a hurt that isn't acknowledged, that sits there with us. Whereas if it's acknowledged and you have the capacity to say it's okay, or let's move on, it really allows us to release that hurt as opposed to just keeping it. Because sometimes then the next time you visit, they're going to be like, that's that lady that said such and such. Because we always remember the negative more than we do the positive, sadly, as a human being.
A lot of what you've said so far relates to when you're physically in the presence of the person. But in this day and age where people are separated by long distances, the connection is often on the phone or on Zoom or something like that. Is there a fundamentally different strategy when you're not physically in the person's presence?
You bring up such a good point, Alan. Yes, these activities are obviously not necessarily something that can be done well when you're not present with the person. And as we've learned through lockdown, you could watch a movie together while on Zoom or while on the phone. You can have a meal together while on Zoom or over the phone. It really is about being willing to be flexible. However, when you're on the phone, you don't get to see as much. So really putting those listening skills is very important because we don't have our other senses to help us understand what's going on. Oftentimes over the phone, it's a good idea to reflect back what they're saying. It sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you miss your husband.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, again, when you aren't there to physically offer a head nod or pat on the arm or just a comforting expression,
Mm-hmm.
you're still able to say that you're hearing them. So that would be the fundamental difference I would add. All right, let's move on to the final section because, okay, now what? We've done all of these things. We've had a connection. We've allowed them to share. We feel that we've created a safe space and maybe we built a better relationship with somebody. And then you realize you need to go. You have other things to do, or it's the time that is allotted. And that can feel like another moment that could be very, very treacherous, where there's pitfalls everywhere. So has anyone had that experience?
Absolutely, yeah.
Anyone feel brave enough to share an example?
Well, when I end a conversation, especially on the phone, you know, I simply say, well, dear, it's been nice talking to you, but I think we've run out of topics. When can we get together again or something like that? I mean, in other words, don't just walk away from it, but try and schedule a next conversation.
That is a very good point, and definitely something that is a great way to end. And the other part of it is, you know, really to what you're saying that I hear is that it's also about acknowledging that it's time to end the conversation instead of the trail off that can happen. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to go now. When it's an emotionally charged conversation, it's very important to feel like the conversation feels closed. So what you said is key, Alan. There's a few other items I'd like to share as possible tips and tricks, but I want to see if anyone else would like to share something that's worked or hasn't worked in the past.
Well, sometimes I've said something like, okay, well, I have to go now because of grocery shopping or make a phone call to someone or something. But I sure have enjoyed talking to you. And I hope we can talk again in the near future. And something maybe, would that be okay with you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Both of you guys have really hit on some key components here, which is very much about ending with something else so that they know it's not, I don't know what's going to happen next. Am I supposed to call you? Are we never going to talk again? That you are giving them the context about how this relationship will continue as a volunteer. So let me click on over. Sometimes it is, especially if they have felt safe enough to share, it's nice to put kind of before going to, let's talk about next steps, or, oh gosh, look at that time. I don't know how it got away from us. It's really nice to say something about the acknowledgement of the fact that they've shared something deep. So really thanking them for being open and sharing, really being able to say, just like you said, Carolyn, you know, I'm really glad we had a chance to talk today. Because sometimes people feel after they've had these deep conversations, there's a sense of draining. And then for some folks, it's a sense of, oh goodness, did I just like go on and on?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want them to feel at the end of the conversation worried about if they shared too much, if that wasn't really the purpose of the visit. Like, let them know that this was really about a good experience, one that had meaning for you as well. And again, like you said, let's make a plan for when we'll talk again. Would anyone else like to bring up any phrases or thoughts about how to end these kinds of conversations?
Well, if I never say this unless it's true, but I like this. If I have been touched, somehow, if it's been a deep conversation, I feel like they've made themselves vulnerable to me. I'll sometimes say to them, you really touch me. I so appreciate you sharing that with me. That may have been difficult for you, but I really appreciate it, or something like that. Just so
Yes.
that, so they
Yes.
and it's really, I do that really, one, it's true, but two, I don't want them to go away feeling like it was, maybe they overshared.
Mm-hmm. To both of those points, absolutely. And to maybe even acknowledge that that was emotionally charged, you know, and that I, again, do this by the person, but I hope you do something to take care of yourself today, because it's a lot when we deal with these emotions, is something that you can also offer up if you do feel like they're emotionally exhausted, to let them know that's okay. All right, well, it's 1:06. I went over, but I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope for all of you it has been moments of insight and support as you go out and do this good work. And also, these are items you can bring into your own family and friends, slightly tweak them, but it's also something that you can incorporate in your own life as well. So if you need anything, obviously go to your villages, but I just wanted to share with you my contact information. Any final thoughts, comments, questions, disagreements? We have 1 moment to do that.
Well, this was really helpful. And you know, both for holiday conversations, but just conversations in general with people. And I don't know if you can see, but my little cat has joined us. And that could be a topic to bring you close to someone, like, oh, I see you have a little cat that likes to go on Zoom, or, you know, something like that, that they're have affection for.
Absolutely. And yes, I loved seeing your kitty.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate, Janet, you spending the time with us and sharing your expertise and experience. Thank you very much again to All Souls Episcopal in Woodley Park, who made a generous grant to Cleveland Woodley Park Village that makes these types of trainings possible. And thank you to all of you, our members and our volunteers for older adults on our time of year, and I'm glad that we spent the time that we did on this topic, and hopefully can be there with people and wherever they are. All right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.